Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Airing It Out podcast. I am Dustin Marin, your host as always. I am so excited to have on to the show for the first time VP Morris. She's an award-winning thriller and horror writer. She's also the host of the Dead Letter podcast or Dead Letter Pod. I don't know which one she prefer. We'll just ask her in a second. And she's also the author of ShadowCast. Welcome to the show, VP, and how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No, for sure. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out and hang out with me a little bit. So I think when we were talking, you moved out to New York City at 18. How long were you in California for?
Actually, only 3 years in California, like proper, but my parents moved to Phoenix when I was three after the big Northridge earthquake, which scared them. So that's why they left. But I have a very large Catholic family that lives in the Orange County area, so I would go back about like 10-ish times a year sometimes to see them because it's not really too far of a drive from Phoenix to like Palm Springs or Orange County. And yeah, so I kind of have like a little mix of a California and Phoenix. And I also spent my high school years in Oregon. So I have a mixed West Coast background.
That's cool. You're like all over the map. That's pretty awesome. So I wanted to ask you. I know I read in your bio that you said roller coasters. The 20-foot drop was just as exhilarating or scary as you coming to New York at 18. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was exhilarating. And I actually don't like roller coasters. I like New York a lot more. So don't let it's not an insult to New York. It's
Not at all. Not at all. We'll dive into it too because I'm originally from New York, but now I'm a California person now, so I don't know.
also we swapped.
Yeah, you're right. They traded us. They traded us. You got them, and then they got me. I think they won the trade for sure.
Oh.
New York is much better with having brighter lights. But as an 18-year-old, did you move there by yourself or with your family
Uh,
as well?
I moved by myself to go to college there, so I did have kind of a like place to be. Like I didn't just randomly decide to go with no plan, which I don't recommend. Like don't just move to New York with absolutely no plan. So it was like a goal of mine to spend my college years in New York City. It was a place I always wanted to go, and I figured college was a good time because you're kind of uprooting yourself anyway, and it's one of those things where if you wait too long in life, you may not ever get around to it. So I decided to just wing it. And I only applied to colleges in New York. I didn't even have like a fallback of staying in Oregon, which I probably should have in hindsight as an adult. But hey, it worked out. So that's a win. But yeah, it's very scary to move there, but it was a great experience overall.
That's awesome. So I wanted to ask you. So you came from Oregon to New York City. That's like two different sides of the coin. How
Mhm.
was it? Were you in New York City? If you don't mind me asking, what university did you attend? Is that okay to ask?
Uh, yeah, Marymount, Manhattan. So my dorm was 55th and 3rd. So we were right in the heart of Midtown. And then yeah, the school itself is in the Upper West Side. So I'd walk about like 20 blocks to class every day.
So what was that like? You're coming from, I would think, like, the woods and nature and everything like that to the hustle and bustle and sirens and ambulances and all of the wonderful stuff that New York gives. What was
Oh,
that
yeah,
actual
so
experience?
loud. Yeah, it's actually when I would go back on like holiday to visit, to stay at my house with my mom and go like Christmas break or spring break, my ears would actually ring for a full day because I wasn't used to the silence. So that was definitely a transition is moving to a place that has a lot of noise, also just like a lot of stimuli that there's just always something happening, which is nice. And I kind of got a little spoiled that I'm used to like having everything open. You could get a gallon of milk at 4 in the morning or Chinese food or whatnot. And now I've moved to the burbs in Connecticut because I have a child, and it's weird to be able to look at places that like close at 9. I'm like, what is this? This doesn't make sense.
Well, it's insane because I spent a little bit of time in Connecticut as well. I'm a little bit like you, a little bit rambunctious through different states. And one of the ones that got me the most insane about Connecticut was one, they close at 9, but two, you can't buy beer or liquor at the grocery store. You have to go to like a state store. And so, party planning took a little bit more extra because you had to make sure that if you wanted to enjoy your evening, you had to go to the store early or you had to buy eventually drive back to the city. But yeah, I love Connecticut. Is Connecticut a little bit more home relevant to you because it is more open? It's a little bit more sticky out there. What do you think?
Well, at first, my then boyfriend, now husband, kind of had to drag me to Connecticut kicking and screaming because he got his job moved from Wall Street to up here in Connecticut. And I did not have any plans of leaving Manhattan at any point. I was mad. I was like, I don't want to go. And I actually had to learn how to drive because I didn't live in Oregon. Um, yeah. And I had to sort of like, thankfully I was over 21 because it takes you like only 3 months to get your license if you're over 21. So I was able to like get my license pretty quickly, but it was terrifying having to learn to drive with a bunch of like Connecticut slash New York slash Massachusetts drivers. And we all know what they have to say about Massachusetts drivers. So it was a little terrifying, but like overall, I kind of find it's a good happy medium between like the cultures. It has a very open, kind of more earthy feel to Oregon, but there's still that New York vibe of kind of a hustle and bustle. And I do like that. It seems like on the East Coast, people are willing to just tell you to your face all their problems. They're get out of the way, do this, do that, where people kind of mince words, at least in my experience in the West Coast. So I kind of like that little mix in Connecticut.
Yeah, no, I find it fascinating because people from, let's say, California want to pretend like they're transparent, but that's not entirely true. And in New York City, they're 100% transparent. They will tell you how they feel about whatever is going on, whether it's the weather or how you drive, or what they think that you're bringing to them. In in your experience in New York City, I wanted to ask you, coming from Oregon and then coming into New York, was it amazing in the sense of being a creator and taking in all this stuff and already starting to think like, wow, this is a great place for me to start maybe to develop characters or environments that I want to bring into some of my stories?
Yeah, I definitely felt a lot more inspired here. I mean, because a lot of stories, just by the fact that New York is a very convenient place, like you can get to places pretty fast. You don't need a car. There's a lot going on. It's just an easy place to set your story. And when you're living there, you have an idea of the culture. Because I kind of hate when it's clearly people who haven't lived in New York or haven't lived in a long time write some sort of either book or movie, and you see them going from like the World Trade Center to Central Park in like 2 minutes. I'm like, that, yeah, good luck with that.
Right. Gotta hail a cab and get there at that time.
Yeah, and also just like if you get out further, like into the suburbs, into the more rural parts of Connecticut or Jersey or Pennsylvania, upstate New York, there's like a lot of really cool, old buildings that have been around since the Revolutionary times. There's some like cool old graveyards left over from that time with people who passed away in like the 1750s. It's really cool to have a lot of history here because America is a really young country and it started over here. So when you get to the West Coast, there's not as much history. Like pioneer times is pretty much as far back as Western civilization goes. And I liked feeling that like I'm in a place that has as most history as this country kind of has.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I just went back to visit a few times within the last 2 years, and even down at the Wall Street area, you see a lot of that old architecture, and even kind of rings a little gothicy, which is really cool. I remember there was a club when I was a younger man, and it was a church converted into a nightclub, and it was kind of spooky and kind of cool all at the same time. And they had all these different rooms and stuff, which were obviously places where the priests and the nuns congregated, and like the main dance floor was like the church itself. So there is definitely a lot of cool stuff in that regard when it comes to New York. Another thing I wanted to ask you, especially in the Pacific Northwest, the weather, it rains more. There's obviously a lot more precipitation. Same thing in the East Coast, especially in New York and the Northeast as well. Similar. Did you find that transition easy in the sense of being easily acclimated to the weather? Because it does rain there a lot, it does snow there a lot. It's actually colder. I make a funny joke that the sun never rises or shines in New York City because it's always like kind of gray, and it kind of hits to that. So, what are some of your thoughts about that?
I actually had a bit of a harder time adjusting to the weather in the East Coast, even though Oregon is very gloomy. There isn't a lot of sunny days, but the winters are generally less harsh, that we don't really get a ton of snowfall. And when it does come down, it's like maybe a few inches or it melts right away. This sort of, kind of nor'easter after nor'easter that can happen where you're getting like, weekend after weekend of 15-inch, snowstorms. And it's just hard to get around. There's snow plows everywhere. That took a lot, and I still don't feel 100% used to it, just because I'm not used to it. And then also I grew up in Phoenix, so my default was like this hot sun that was always on me, and now like feeling really cold even in my adult years as I've adjusted to it, it still is weird. I'm still like, this is weird to me. Even though, and I've asked, my husband is from Jersey, so he grew up with this, and he like doesn't even bat an eye. He's just like, oh, this is just how it is.
So is he doing all the shoveling, or you guys got the heated driveway?
No, we pay someone to do it because neither of us are very, hands-on or athletic. So we're just, let's not risk going to the emergency room.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Listen, it's a hard life. A lot of people don't realize, especially, I mean, you being in Connecticut, that's one discussion, but in the city itself, all these people compacted on top of each other. I think the last time I checked on the island itself, it's 5 million. The square footage is not that big. We build up instead of across, and then you add inclement weather on that, traffic that's sometimes brutal. And so, it's definitely a tough experience, but I definitely believe that it shapes interesting characters, and that's definitely got to lend itself, especially when you're trying to become a creative writer, which I want to dive into. But I was very fascinated when I was looking on your bio for Twitter. You said you wore a red dress for your wedding, just similar. I think I don't know you use the exact words, but cooler than the one from Beetlejuice, but similar to the one in Beetlejuice. Tell me about your wedding and what was that like? Someone that seems to have passion for horror as an underlying theme.
Yeah, I got married on Halloween 2017. So, and adding like a spooky element on top of it, it was actually very, very small ceremony. I don't really like being the center of attention. And I kind of had like a slight, like the idea was more just sort of undercurrent theme to it. And yeah, my dress, I actually have, I think there's pictures of it on Instagram if people feel the need to scroll through and find it. Yeah, it's a less 80s, less poofy version of the Beetlejuice kind of red dress. Definitely my hair is less 80s. But yeah, red's my favorite color, and if anyone, I don't know if you are putting this video up for anyone to see, but I'm very pale, as you can see right now, and me and white is just one big sheet, and I just could not have my most special day, as they say, be looking like just like a bed sheet with hair. So I went red, and I think it looks good with my skin tone, and it's just, yeah, it's my favorite color. So I wanted to wear it on a day that I would go down in my best memories.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, because for a second there, I was like, I wonder if it's the lighting in the background, or does she have like another light on her? Because right now, I don't know. I didn't get my makeup and wardrobe done properly. I look super red in comparison to your
This
skin.
is
The contrast is
like
crazy.
warmer compared to how I've looked in the past. Like I've had teachers stop class and ask me if I was going to faint when I was a teenager. And like I was not going to faint. I'm just very, very pale. So yeah, a full white gown would just be too much.
Yeah, so I love it. Great sense of humor. That's fun. Definitely, it's got to be a thing when people are thinking, or teachers are thinking you're gonna pass out due to
Yeah.
skin color. But I want to ask you, since we were just talking about Beetlejuice, fan, not a fan. What are your thoughts on the film overall? I mean, I wanted to ask you. I put it a little later, but we'll start with: did you enjoy the movie?
I mean, yeah, I mean, anything that is kind of on the creepier side of life, I generally enjoy, unless it's just an absolute mess. And it's obviously not. It's a, classic beloved film. I actually didn't see it during my childhood. So a lot of people I'm 29, so I was born in the 90s. So a lot of people in the 80s and 90s childhood tend to like love this movie because they saw it when they were like 10 or so. And I didn't. I just saw it maybe when I was like 24 or something like that. So I just don't have that same nostalgia that a lot of people do. And there's some stuff that doesn't age as well. Like they have, like people who committed suicide are like punished by being civil servants in the afterlife, which nowadays is not really a funny joke anymore because we're kind of more cool with mental health topics. But overall, like I like the red dress, the fact that Lydia's kind of has like this special ability to see ghosts and that no one believes her, and she actually kind of gets like pseudo parents in these ghost couples, and just like this whole world of people existing, after life, because we kind of see a either like Dante's Inferno version of the afterlife, or this like angelic heaven singing. And I just like it when it's kind of like the world 2.0. So I like, overall I liked it. It's just not my absolute favorite.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a huge movie film buff, and I don't know where it ranks, but I definitely have the nostalgia because to age myself, I'm 40, so I definitely seen it in the 80s, and it was rented a bunch of times, also rerun on a lot of TV networks, and I did enjoy it. I liked that there was an element of humor with it, which is funny to me that seems to kind of go hand in hand in a weird way, where horror kind of has to have like an underlining of comedy to kind of lighten up some of the material. But I mean, the soundtrack's fantastic. The colors are great. Michael Keaton's just over the top. It's actually a really vulgar film when you think about it. As a kid, I remember watching it and having him like grab his junk was like, oh my god, what is this about? It's definitely not PG, even though a PG-13, even though I think that's the rating on it. But looking back at it now, if I would let my kids see it, I don't know if I would, and I would kind of put it in that rated R department because there is a lot of swearing and there is a lot of like tough references in it. But again, so many cool scenes. The sculptures coming to life, the stairs coming to life, a lot of that other cool stuff. The afterworld and all that stuff, is definitely up for debate. You were just talking about Dante's Inferno and stuff, and I was listening to your podcast and some of the other interviews you were doing. I wanted to see a little bit about your thoughts on how maybe potentially Edgar Allan Poe influenced some of your writing.
He's a big influence. That was kind of my favorite parts of English lit class as a teenager, was when we would get into the Gothic Romantic time period, which is he's like one of the biggest figures of that time. And it definitely spoke to me because I'm just naturally drawn to the darker side of life. I don't particularly like a lot of gore or graphic violence, but someone like Poe doesn't do that a lot. There might be some kind of grosser elements to his writing, but it's definitely not like Saw. And yeah, there's something about it, because as you're going through kind of the history of English stuff, there's like a lot of, I don't know, like romance writing and floral poetry, and it's okay. I like it, but this, like when I would read this stuff, I was like, oh, this is my jam.
Yeah, no, I wasn't really compelled as a youngster to be interested in English lit or being a writer. I mean, I was even over analyzing my outline to you because I was like, man, I'm sending this to a writer. I hope all my punctuation and my sentence structure is okay. Because I feel like when you're in the space, it's hard not to be critical. But I do remember listening and reading his stuff and always finding it compelling because he definitely wrote extremely different and dark in a way that was more suggestive.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the word I'm trying to use, but not being so in your face, like you were saying. And some of the other, I mean, I haven't read that much horror literature, but it was really great in the sense that it seemed like a very uh, full of satire, and it was awesome. There was a lot of underlining things. I mean, some of the times that I enjoy reading is when the character puts themselves in third person and you can hear their thoughts as they're talking about them. I mean, that's what I really, really digged about your podcast. I think you did a great job and not only capturing what the characters were going through, but also their thought processes and how they do that. And I think that's why people find reading interesting, because you get to see more, right? And so that's what I enjoy when I watch movies, and it doesn't seem like they have that like narrative feel to it. So, but yeah, no, Poe is an interesting guy. He's done a lot of great work. I wanted to, because you said gory, so it made me think of something. Are we losing our way in the horror genre where now it has to be like 10 movies, everything has to be an iteration of Saw or some other thing, and like we reboot every version of a film? Like, what are your thoughts on the horror genre and where it's headed, and could there be a way that we can revitalize it a little bit, maybe going backwards instead of this newer kind of copy stuff?
Well, there is kind of like an overall problem the movie industry is having as a whole, which is over reliance on either reboots or franchises of just making like the 10th of a very well-known thing because it will just bring people in, and that's, doesn't yield to the best storytelling because, if you can't, you have to revive some either dead superhero or, crazed killer for the 100th time. It gets a little old and it kind of like sells this beginning of the franchise a little short. So like overall, because they're just trying to, it's get people interested, because with streaming people are less likely to come to the theater. So I get the business model idea of it, but it unfortunately hurts like the horror genre too, because a lot of stuff, if it's not a reboot or a franchise, then it's just like a cheap thrill to try to get like teenagers in the theater to like get scared in person. And sometimes those are fun. Like I'm a big fan of the Paranormal Activity franchise, which it does not have a lot of depth. It is a very shallow film, but it's fun. But it's just sometimes there's just too much of that, like either jump scare or, oh, this is the goriest thing since this other movie, and then it's just like, how many times can you see someone's head getting chopped off? I like when there's actually more going on under the surface. Like I'm a big fan of what the A24 production team does with things like Hereditary or Midsummer, where it's like it's dark and it can be violent, but it has a lot going on.
Yeah, no. I'm a fan of it all, but I do agree with you. There definitely should be layers to it. I think as a filmmaker, as a director, as a writer, you want to have not only your characters to have duality, but there to also be layers within the film, and seeing character arcs and different ways to introduce not only acts but climaxes within the narrative. If it's just like they said, they just beat you with the music for the scare and then they beat you with the music for the head chop off scene. I mean, it's not all done as well as some of the other ones. I mean, the one that I enjoy, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but the Conjuring series, I think they've done a pretty decent job at making a big kind of like series, but it's interesting and it's actually organically scary versus some of the other ones that are just trying to scare you for just cause and get like a shock appeal.
Yeah, I do. I'm a big fan of the Conjuring franchise and James Wan as a director. He's very talented, and yeah, it has. He's good at keeping like a tonal theme of like creepiness throughout his movies, and it kind of changes the, so I guess, villain or scares, even though there's like reoccurring characters like the nun or Annabelle, but it's not just like Annabelle the 100th time, which it might get there. I really hope it doesn't get there. But um, at least with that, there's so much on the world that they've built that they can go in many different directions without it just being like, oh, he's back again.
I think he did an interesting job in the sense of like how Marvel built it, that it's more of a universe and
Yeah.
not so much of as a series where there's just doing the same thing, like it's Annabelle 13, like Annabelle Revenge, Annabelle from Vegas, Annabelle from Space, kind of like the Jason series went, or the Jason Voorhees or the Friday the 13th series just constantly pumps out just to get those, and then they got to go backwards and it's the beginning and some of these other ways of doing it. I wanted to take a break from talking about the films for a second because I do want to go back to that, but I really wanted to dive in on how do you begin the process of writing. I want to talk to you a little bit about the novel, but when you're ready to say, okay, I'm gonna create something, how do you prepare for that? If you don't mind sharing with us.
Yeah, I'm a big outliner. I originally wasn't when I first started writing, and I kind of would wing it. And I realized that it just takes longer, and you end up getting confused and backtracking and all this stuff. So even when it is just a short story, I do have an outline of what I want to happen, and I also like write down like little informational bits about the characters, like hair, eye color, height, any sort of maybe backstory stuff, and basically I forget which writer said it, but someone said you're right. Your writing should be like an iceberg, that the characters should have full lives, but you don't have to tell the reader everything that's happened to them. It should just kind of poke up out of the water like an iceberg without having to explain all of the stuff. And I kind of like to create the bottom of my iceberg first before I start diving in. And then I kind of just start taking little whacks at the outline and working through it.
I went to a writing course one time, and speaking about outlines, they were like, "Okay, this is how we're going to show you how to write a book." It's like, okay, you figure out how many chapters you want to do, and then you write 3 sentences for each chapter, and then those 3 sentences you expand on, and then expand on, and then expand on. Is that kind of something like what you do in the sense of you have your outline, you start writing it, and then you kind of look back and either add or pull away?
Yeah, I kind of not with that's actually a really good method. I actually should try that maybe for the next book, but it's similar to that I have certain beats that I want to meet, like it's, meets scary person does XYZ type of a thing. So if I have a scene in mind, I have to sort of outline myself to get to that scene. I'm actually currently finishing up writing a short story about a haunted freeway off ramp, which I've had in my mind for about 5 years now. I'm finally really getting to it. So I have like scenes of, in my mind of people going down this haunted slash decrepit, forgotten old like freeway off ramp that's been abandoned. And I've been outlining to how do I get them to that scene that I originally envisioned. And then how, after they get there, how do I, wrap it up or bring up the tension depending where it is in the story.
It's interesting because I'm obviously doing way too much in my life because now I'm trying to tackle maybe potentially putting together a screenplay. And I find it fascinating on how when you get this image, how you got to kind of walk it back or reverse engineer it because you still got to get it there. Like that could be either the middle, could be the end, could be the beginning, could be the end that you want to put in the beginning, but trying to figure out how you want to get there seems to be the harder part because you can have a vision of something that's, maybe 10, 15 pages or whatever the case might be, but then it might not be congruent on how you're trying to tell the story. Have you sometimes found some bumps in the road in your writing process with that?
Yeah, I mean it's never ever smooth, even if you think your outline is excellent. I mean, it's a great jumping off point. It's kind of like a skeleton and you have to put the meat on top of it, but sometimes you have to rearrange stuff. And it's kind of frustrating because you might be in love with like an idea, but if it doesn't work out, you have to just get out the axe and just allow yourself to chop it. Like I had a really like cool ending that I had in mind and it just was not working. So I had to just let it go, even though I didn't want to let it go, but it just would have kind of, I don't know, it just didn't end, it didn't feel right. And it's kind of, it's not a science, it's an art. And you kind of have to trust your gut that if after reading it, you're just like, no, it's not working. Even if you were in love with the idea to begin with, you have to just let it go and start a different thing and see if that fits better.
To speak to that, you're a mom, right? I'm a dad. And it's funny as a creator how these works become like your children. And when you got to cut them or kill them or let them go, it's so hard. And I feel like a lot of people don't create enough because of that. They're just so stuck on the idea and they kind of get locked in when, maybe that could work some other time. It's like, you just categorize it or put it away. But it's really hard sometimes, even for me. I'm like, man, that sounds so good, but maybe the audio's cracked or this is, and I'm like, it's just got to go. And I think that's a hard part. Do you find yourself struggling a little bit sometimes because you just absolutely adore something and then you just brokenhearted because you just got to let it go?
Yeah, that's a hard part. And on top of it, when like you're done, or at least you think you're done with like the editing part, and you send it to either like a beta reader or you submit it to be submitted, like if it's a short story, to an editor of a magazine or something, and they just don't get it, and it kind of like breaks your heart. It's like feels like someone is judging your kid a little bit, like they got turned down, but it's, you can't be too sentimental about it. And it's just like I wrote this one story and the person just like missed the whole point, and I was like, oh no. And so it just, that horrible feeling of just like, oh, they didn't get it. And you like have to, also use your gut to think, are they wrong, am I wrong, or is it a mixture of both? And it's usually a mixture of both.
I feel like writers, whether it's the big screen or for podcasts or for TV, film, or for novels in that capacity. I was listening to something that oh my god, I don't even know why I'm drawing a blank right now. Oh my god, this is terrible. It'll come to me. I don't know why I'm drawing back. But anyways, he was talking about on how you shouldn't confuse your audience. And to speak to what you were saying, How even if you're trying to be creative and cut Quentin Tarantino, excuse me, I don't know why I had a brain fart on that one, but he spoke about not confusing the audience. Do you feel like sometimes maybe within your work, speaking to that one person, that you might have to dumb down stuff sometimes because they might not get or see your vision? How do you if you could speak to some of that as well?
Yeah, I mean, in this particular example, I'm obviously not like naming anyone in particular, but they weren't a exclusive like dark fiction magazine. They took everything, and this person I just read their bio doesn't have experience really writing or reading thriller slash horror that much. So some of the stuff that is kind of like standard tropes of the genre that I'm working with, they kind of just didn't understand why it was there. So part of it is like having to find the right home for your work, whatever that might be. And so, maybe working with people who aren't, very familiar with your genre or to their, and it's kind of a good thing that it didn't get published in his magazine because it wasn't exclusively kind of dark fiction, and maybe his readership wouldn't have understood it because it just wasn't his bag, even if though he was open to all genres. So it's kind of like you kind of have to, like, that's when it's a combination of both you and the person giving you feedback. Like maybe there are things I could have made clearer, but maybe this guy he just doesn't do this genre, and I just have to move on to greener pastures.
Another thing that I kind of find myself jammed up a little bit, and I just practiced it like a few months ago, with all the film, with all the TV, with the books probably that you've read or stories that you've heard. Do you find yourself wanting to turn off the noise, especially in the creative process, so that doesn't really affect on how you're putting something out? Because I feel like the more stuff you add in is like outside noise, and you kind of have to just get what you want out first before you can let some other stuff in.
Yeah, when I'm actively writing something, I can't really be reading anything in my genre because it will start to affect both my voice and also where the story is going. But I will like search for something before I start a new project that does very well a thing that I might be lacking or want to improve. Like I'm currently reading The Woman in the Window by AJ Finn, which is being turned into a movie for Netflix. And there's a lot of very unique descriptive language that doesn't take away from the, I guess, suspense of the story. And that's something I want to work on, is still being able to write in kind of a literary style without it being too long and too descriptive. So I am kind of using that as a way to sort of study that style and then kind of make it my own. But once I start a new thing using that example, I don't want to like hear anybody else's voice. I have to, sometimes I just like will watch nothing but dumb teen movies because it's so far away, like The Breakfast Club or like She's All That, like just completely opposite of what I write so that I don't have that interference.
Yeah, it happens with me too because I have found that I've borrowed a lot of styles from some of the podcasters within the space. But when I'm trying to work and starting to create, I'm like, I just got to watch something or hear something that has nothing to do with anything, because it is very interesting on how it actually can change your voice, your viewpoint, and frame things the way you might not be wanting to frame them, and leading the way on how things are going to be structured. So I find that really interesting. That I was talking to somebody about it, and they said, that's when you really start to create, is when, you silence the noise and you're just in your own mind, because there are other outside things that are coming in that could definitely screw with the overall narrative. I know I talked to you about it. We're kind of on a tight schedule, so I don't want to lag too much, but I'm loving it up to this point. I wanted to dive into some of the younger stuff that you did, because obviously if you were a writer and you went to school for writing, right, or English literature, right? Were you writing right out the gate when you was a kid? So like 8, 9, 10, were you already writing
About
stories?
11 is when I started. I got a like fuzzy Lisa Frank notebook for Christmas that year. And I first wanted to be a songwriter because I was really into like the alternative rock thing that was going on, like right before Green Day got bad. And no offense, still love Green Day.
Don't worry about it.
Just to anyone who might be a super big Green Day fan. I mean, like it's 2004, but it's yeah. So like I kind of wanted to do that, but I don't like. I'm okay at the guitar and I'm okay at singing, but it's not like my thing. And I realized I was excelling at writing like the lyric part, or at least that was the part I was getting excited about, and I didn't really care about, oh, what key is this written in, whatever. So I just kind of decided, oh, I should just write stories. Like I don't need the music part. I'm attracted to one element of this thing. And even though I still really love music, it's just not the thing that I should be creating. And I just kind of went on from there, took a bunch of creative writing classes. Yeah, I went to college for English lit, psychology, and creative writing. And then I just, have done it in various forms, like technical writing and, creative writing as well.
So we were just talking about influences and how people influence your work when you were young at that age. And I put this here because this was what I was kind of around and reading. I don't know if there were different authors when you were coming up, but like R.L. Stein, Stephen King, when you were doing your research as a youngster, did you find yourself leading to a certain kind of novelist or looking at certain authors? Or, once you find someone, you kind of stick with them and you kind of be like the only fan for them and you just cherry them on and read and consume everything they have. And it kind of makes your style a little bit until you kind of make your own. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So the book for like younger children, like middle grade children, that really struck my attention was Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. And like I still am blown away that that was allowed to be sold to children. And I mean, like I'm okay with it because I liked it, but I'm wondering if I will let my kid read it when he's that age. At least I will be somewhat the cool mom and let him and his friends watch scary movies on Halloween. But yeah, that kind of like, I was not used to scary stories being sold to younger audiences. It was always kind of like taboo for when you're kind of under the 14, like in the 9 to 14 age range, that it was just starting to become appropriate, but like your parents weren't usually like you should go watch a scary movie or read a scary book. And it was at, one of those scholastic book fairs, and I bought one and I just was totally blown away that it's kind of like eating spicy food. It's like, oh, I hate this, but I want more. And that's how I was like getting so scared, but like I couldn't walk away from it either. And that's kind of how it's always been. It's just like, I don't really like being scared. I like having been scared. So that's the early influence. And then I do love King. I mean, you can't really, not everything is my favorite from him, but his short stories are just excellent. So I recommend any of his short stories are pretty much bomb.
It's funny. I have a few associates, and they told me that some of his novels went to audiobook, and they were like, "It is probably some of the scariest stuff to listen to," which you never really think about that, right? We usually either potentially might read it and be frightened, or watch a film and be frightened. Excuse me. The audio frightening I find is fascinating because there's nothing around you, but just it getting into your head is pretty insane. I wanted to ask you. You wrote this novel. What was that process like? If you can walk us through kind of the inception, middle, and then getting it, to production and putting it out there.
Yeah, so this is actually like my third that I've completed. The other two were just like very novice attempt. The first one I didn't even like show or have or try to get an agent or a publisher with. The second one, it was a little bit too much out there. At least that was the feedback I was getting. It wasn't really fitting too much into the genre conventions, even though it just was still a little bit too odd. And this one, I did my research and wanted it to still be unique to me, but fit the thriller genre with a little bit of horror mixed into it. And then I definitely outlined this way better than I've ever outlined anything, because there is a mystery, and you have to be very careful about what you are revealing and when, because if it's too much too soon, then you ruined it. You ruined the surprise. And then if it's too little, then the reader feels like they are blindsided, or that you were purposefully just dragging them along. So I had to be very careful with the information that was being given at any time. And then I shopped it around for a bit, and I found a really awesome independent publisher, Black Rose Writing, and it was published with them in February. So it's been about 2 months.
Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
so amazing. Excuse me. I don't know what's going on here, but I was gonna say, when you talk about mystery, the first thing that came to my head was Scooby Doo, and how well, even for a cartoon, they were really decent at confusing us. It was only 30 minutes, maybe even less than that, of keeping the character hidden, so that I don't. I find it interesting when you bring it up, what it takes into on trying to be careful on how much you're giving out, especially as a reader. You're trying to describe everything, but obviously you have to have a hidden agenda. So it's almost like you got to write two stories, which I find that weird. You got to write the story that you want to tell them, and then the story that's the underlining. So I find that interesting. I wanted to ask you, what made you consider, or who talked you into saying like, hey, podcasting in the horror thriller genre is hot right now. Why don't you give it a shot? Or did you already think like, hey, I'm going to write this, and I think I should already start taking advantage of this?
I have been really interested or a listener of podcasts since they first started getting really popular around like 2013, 2014-ish. And I've had a multitude of office jobs, and a lot of them have like spreadsheets, and it's just so boring, and it's like 8 hours of like organizing spreadsheets or various other mundane tasks that once you get the hang of it, you're kind of bored. So I would have it on, and it would be either like horror movie reviews, or it would be, telling a story or true crime. And I just fell in love with the idea of kind of like, it's a radio show 2.0, but you don't have to be on a network. It can just be on the internet. And for this novel, which does have a true crime podcast in it, it's an interesting twist on kind of the detective of genre of having to use this new technology to sort of broadcast what's going on with a particular case.
Yeah, no, I was listening. Like I said, it was really, really awesome. I really liked like I said, the way you described the characters and exactly, especially what they were thinking and what they were going through. I thought was really cool. Um, I wanted to dive into a little bit of. I listened to your interview with Watch If You Dare, the podcast, and what a great episode for you to pick such a great movie, Silence of the Lambs. This symbiotic relationship with female empowerment and horror. Sometimes, I mean, I even remember like within your story, she's like, I don't want to fall like most girls in the horror movies. I thought it was really funny, and like a high five or an Easter egg to the genre. What are your thoughts on that coinciding and the development of it from like 80 slasher films to where it's at now? And I think you guys discussed that maybe Silence of the Lambs did it the best.
Yeah, I mean, about Silence of the Lambs, and what I hope to imitate with all of my work that has a female protagonist, is that they feel like real people, that they aren't either, just a stereotype of like the final girl, or, the slutty one that gets killed right away, or the innocent one that doesn't know anything that's going on. Or and then there's, as we kind of gotten more progressive, there's the like, I'm a woman and I can do all the things. And that just kind of gets boring, because even if that's true, you need to have a personality outside of just being very capable. And I feel, Clarice is capable. She's nice. She's friendly, but she gets the job done. And you feel for her, and you're scared for her at times, and you're proud of her at times. And that's what I want. I want people to really attach themselves to these characters, and not see them as like a stock trope, or, oh, it's just pushing some agenda towards, women being X, Y, and Z. I want to tell a good story. And if there's I want my male protagonist to be awesome too. So I want both to feel like real people that you would root for.
Yeah, speaking to that also, and I don't know, maybe I didn't prepare enough for this one, but are we even going to see female directors get into this space and maybe start to give their point of views and stuff like that into horror genre overall? Because a lot of the guys that we've talked about, whether it's Stephen King, and we're going to get into like Alfred Hitchcock, Wes Craven, John Carpenter, Sam Raimi's another guy, but you don't really hear any female directors in the space, whether it was before or after. What are your thoughts on that maybe potentially changing in the future?
I mean, I think it is slowly moving in the right direction, even if it takes time. And I'm more on the patient side of things. There's actually kind of like a funny quote from Dave Chappelle talking about like both like progressive of all the topics, race, sex, sexual orientation, of that it takes a minute, and that you have to we're slowly letting go of some very bad things that we used to do in the past. And so even though those things are falling away, I think it's still going to take a little bit longer, and we're now more willing to champion female voices, and things have come to light about discrimination or harassment. So that's now no longer as kosher as it once was. So I think it probably in the next 10, 20 years, there will be pretty big names. I mean, there still are becoming more and more big names um, in the space. And even though I don't believe she directed it, Diablo Cody wrote Jennifer's Body. And I actually just did a guest spot on another past podcast talking about that. And it's how like we're now looking at some of the older horror movies that had like a woman's voice with like a better light. And I think that we're just going to start having more of that happen with, you know, past works or with stuff going forward. It's I actually just posted a quote to my Instagram and Twitter that horror is a woman's genre, and it's actually a quote from Grady Hendrix, who wrote Paperbacks from Hell, which is a like a retrospective on horror as a publishing genre. And it's just that, you know, back in the day, in the times of Gothic romances, it was started by women writers with a woman audience in mind, and then it kind of became many different things as the era has progressed. But it's definitely have always spoken to women in some aspect, even if like things like the slasher genre hasn't been the most female friendly thing. I think there's always been like a good home for us somewhere in there, and maybe more in the future.
No, that's amazing. That's also an amazing outlook. I find it fascinating because when you think about it, right, like it's usually being told from the perspective of a woman, and there's only men writing these scenes, right? Like, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis is one of the more famous young ladies in that department, but like I said, she was, you know, carried or ushered on in with John Carpenter. And then you have Freddy or Nightmare on Elm Street, and it was all female protagonists. And then you can go on and on and on. I mean, even, you know, with the Friday the 13th series, now with some of the other stuff coming up, I just find it interesting and hopeful that we can actually see another side. And I think that's why, in my opinion, there's been such a big rise in a lot of the females doing like the true crime stuff, the thriller and the horror stuff, because now their vision is now coming forward. And I think it's compelling and interesting.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see more good like female protagonists, and you know, having women a part of all stages of like of movie production or of the publishing side of things. It's really refreshing, and I'm in favor of it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the future holds. Like the ones I mentioned, like Hereditary and Midsummer, both have female protagonists in there, and they're a bit unusual. They don't really fit any of those stock characters, and I really like that.
When you were talking about A24, I think they do amazing work, whether it's
Mhm.
horror stuff or whatever. They're very outside the box. They definitely look at writers and directors and take stuff that you normally don't see, almost kind of similar without not such a quick cash grab as like what Netflix does, and kind of
Mhm.
lets their creators create and doesn't put so much a stopping as, like, in my opinion, Warner Brothers, who just the execs get a hold of it and then they, you know, they test it and they're like, oh, this movie's gonna be terrible. So I would like for more of the stuff to come out, and then us not to have to wait for a director's cut of something to really
Yeah.
see what the true vision of the artist is. You know, I just mentioned Wes Craven, John Carpenter, Alfred Hitchcock. I don't know what are your thoughts or relations to these gents, but if you can talk to me a little bit about that, as well as some of the directors that when you were coming up as a youngster that you found compelling and interesting that you wanted to borrow or involve with your work.
I definitely am biased towards Hitchcock, because he was definitely the first, you know, movie director that did scary things, and especially since he's from an older generation. You know, like the censoring was stricter, so I was able to watch that as a younger person without, you know, parents being as weirded out by it. If I wanted to go see Freddy versus Jason in theaters, that would have been a hard no. But wanting to watch Psycho or Vertigo or The Birds wasn't seen as like weird, or you need a parent's permission to go into the theater to see that sort of thing. And I like that he can do so much with so little. That like with The Birds, it's a bird, like normally you wouldn't be scared of that, but he makes it scary. And I mean, I do like the slasher genre for what it is. It's not, I generally don't really write it that much, but I do enjoy it. And I do like Freddy the best of the slashers, because he's funny and he has a personality and he's like ethereal and weird, where the other ones, even though they're great and scary in their own right, don't have a personality. And I like that he kind of like has jokes and taunts and like I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy. Like I just like Michael Myers doesn't say that. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's strange because I wanted to ask you, but my all time like scary movie, not so much as favorite scary movie, was Halloween 1 and 2, and a large part of it was is that he's very stoic and doesn't talk, and the guy, I mean, you can shoot him, stab him, electrocute him, all this stuff, and he's kind of resilient, but there is no personality involved, which is kind of weird because now you're hopeful and you're waiting for the other cast and surrounding members to pull it up. I mean, I thought it was a great casting to have Curtis in it, but like when you look at the Friday the 13th series, it was kind of hard for them to find somebody in it because you just had the stoic guy, and they kept changing ensembles because he killed everybody all the time. So yeah, no, Freddy was always funny. I always found it weird, in my opinion, that horror was comedy. Like when I first started coming into it, I was like, I don't like it. Only because I wanted to be scared, I guess. Because I thought that had more power. But now looking back at it, it's great as a satire, I believe.
Yeah, I know there's some good like horror comedies or dark comedies that have come out recently, like Dale and Tucker versus Evil and Cabin in the Woods. And I definitely I struggle writing humor because I just naturally go dark. It's just my thing. And I've forced myself to start getting better just so I become a better writer in all things, to start trying to write a little bit more humor here and there into the darkness. And I do like that it kind of gives the audience a reprieve from all the darkness, that if you can cut that tension for a little bit, but not down too much, but enough to get a little laugh in between the screams or the like, uncomfortable feeling that you get when you're watching something. And like Pennywise is kind of the same way. He like is taunting or funny, and there's like, I don't know, I was like the weirdo in the theater that when he said it was real, it wasn't real enough for Georgie, I laughed, and I was like the only person who laughed, and I was like, oh, there's something wrong with me. But just like I kind of liked that there's like a little bit of snark, that he's just like throwing like insults while he's tormenting them, where if it was maybe the 70s, he would just be like the silent stalking clown, where later we're seeing him have like more of a theatrical character.
Yeah, no, how Curry did it originally, and it was weird because it was made for TV. I feel played more into that. I think with this version, it's one of my faves for sure to date. And I thought again the cast was just absolutely phenomenal. Even the younger cast and the older cast, and how they mend getting the right people to even do the adult versions of it. I mean, it was definitely very, very interesting, and it was great because it was a break in between him eating people or torturing or whatever the case might have been, that you were able to like alleviate yourself a little bit and be like, okay, I can now build up the gauge again to get scared. I didn't get to ask you. I've been, saying with some of my stuff. We'll go. What was your favorite scary movie when you were younger, and your favorite scary movie now that you're older?
Let's see. I mean, it depends on like how young. So if it's like preteen, because I kind of have had to work myself into being scared. It's almost like developing like a tolerance for alcohol. You're kind of having to get yourself used to it. And like I used to watch things like some back when YouTube was more of the Wild West and there was like bootleg things on there all the time. I would watch things in like the really small theatrical like thing where it'd be just up in the screen, and then now like I'm watching it on full size TV. So I've graduated. That's like when I was like 19 and slowly kind of getting myself into it. But around that time was when the Paranormal Activity franchise kicked off. So I would say from that time, from like my late teens, early 20s, that was my favorite, particularly the third one. And a lot of people like to make fun of that franchise, and that's fine because it's stupid, but I love it. And I used to see it every Halloween with my roommate from college, and we now have a tradition of seeing a scary movie every Halloween. And now, oh man, it's really hard to say what my favorite would be, but I would actually have to give it for right now Midsummer, but that probably will change. But yeah, I think they did such a great job. I can't. The fact that it's daylight almost the entire time and they're still can terrify you is probably why I'm in love with that movie right now.
Yeah, no, it was on my list of to do things to watch. I've heard nothing but great reviews about it. I also too during Halloween, I just don't watch one horror movie. It's a marathon, and I'll put on whatever and everything. I mean, I think I even sometimes subscribe to Shutter for that 1 month, and just let it go and let it play and have fun. Or I'll just go crazy and do like all the Friday the 13s and all the Freddy's and all the Halloweens, just to get you jacked and get you excited. Halloween's a good time. It's a great time to play characters and to be a character and to create whatever character you find interesting. Before I let you go, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it. I know like the icon for your show is in black and white. I had my first like logo in black and white. A friend of mine, as an experiment, turned his phone to black and white. And he said, I think this is going to be interesting because you're going to be able to see things in a totally different light where it's just a utility or a tool, right? Where you're not getting like this endorphin of different colors and everything happening. And what ended up happening was that I started watching movies in black and white that weren't. Where do you think that we might, and we were just talking about Alfred Hitchcock, are we missing the mark, not incorporating more of that? I mean, I know like House of a Thousand Corpses has a couple scenes where they play with imagery and lighting, where if it's really gory, they might put it in a red scene to kind of dumb it down. Do you think we're missing the mark a little bit on that? Maybe reintroducing some of those elements back into the genre?
Yeah, I want there to be a bit more of a renaissance of black and white because it does, especially when it comes to things like scares, you really don't need to see things in excellent color. There were like something like sci-fi would benefit from a lot of color because you're out in space and you're seeing all this weird cool things that you may not see on planet Earth. But um, horror doesn't necessarily need a ton of visual extras. It can exist in black and white, and that's why, I mean, Psycho, they chose to make it in black and white. They could have done it in color, even though I think it would have cost more or something. But either way, it doesn't need it. And I think that it would be kind of nice for filmmakers to kind of challenge the norm that it has to be in like stunning, beautiful color. And sometimes it's done really well, and other times I think that it could look better. Things could also just be creepier because when you are playing with black, white, and gray, you don't see everything as clearly, so there's more of this element of either surprise or if you're seeing something like in the shadows, you don't see it as clearly, so that gives you more of like the creeps and like the infamous scene of discovering Mrs. Bates's corpse in the basement and the light flapping around the room and it's changing the way you see the skull. I think that it would look worse in color, so you could really play around with just one really scary scene in black and white, and it doesn't need full spectrum to be that way.
Yeah, no, I thought about it in general. I think like noir's got to come back even into to bringing into that genre. It does so much. I also within my experiment, you pay attention to so much more. Like you're so much more involved, and we're a slave to the game, right? So now it's HD and 4K and 19K and 17K and 720, and so as we continue to go up, we just want all this stuff to look so beautiful and so epic. And I think even with now us switching to HD film and also switching to like a lot of these 3D things with like the Avatar series and all of that. Some of that grain, some of that 35 millimeter stuff is kind of missing. When you can see that, it kind of gives it life. Like there's for me, the original Chainsaw Massacre is awesome because not only is it scary and creepy, but it looks like it was shot on a handheld camera. But now when you see some of these other films that do it, I think Paranormal Activity was one of the better ones that did it in the sense of how they did the grain and all those things. I mean, they're my hero in a large perspective because I think I'm right on this. The first one only had a $10,000 budget, which is absolutely insane to shoot at that price point. I don't even know if you could still do that now. You probably would have to work with strictly film students. But
Yeah.
wow, that is amazing. And I just find it fascinating. And I really like you would like us to see more of that. And I'm trying to do my contribution to that because I'm going to release some of my older shows and they're in color, but I think I'm going to put them all in black white because they're retro and just to add that element. I think it's really cool and it brings out detail more without color. I think there's a lot more to say without color. Even like what you were saying, your color, your favorite color is red. I even think like for the Sin City stuff, that was absolutely great. Like color one thing, right? So maybe the characters is green, or her silhouette is red, or her hair is gold, and then everything else, and then it really pops. And I think that that's really creative, which I was very very excited about when I seen the Sin City series. Well, VP, I know you're busy. You got to go get your son, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. I hope you had a good time. I would love to get you back on, talk some more horror, talk some more podcasting. I really want to get into how you got into your process of editing and doing all this stuff, because people think that podcasting is easy, and it's not. It's hard as heck, and there's so many different facets to it. So thank you so much for spending time with us, and I would like to give you an opportunity if you want to plug anything or have anybody follow you or any of that stuff.
Yeah, it's been great having me here. I've had a great time talking, and yeah, I'd love to talk horror or podcasting or whatnot anytime. So I have a book out, ShadowCast. It is about a out of work investigative journalist who uses her newfound free time to investigate the disappearance of her best friend from high school, and she uses a true crime podcast to do that, but little does she know someone sinister is listening in and messing with her investigation. And that can be found on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, and through my publisher's website, which is Black Rose Writing. And I do have a podcast. It is a fictional mini series, and that can be found basically anywhere there's podcasts. It's called the Dead Letters Podcast, and it's at Dead Letters Pod on Twitter. And I'm at T Write Repeat. That's TEAWRITE on both Instagram and Twitter.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, young lady, for coming out. It looks like it's a sunny day in Connecticut, so I hope you get
40 degrees though.
That's why I moved to the West. I just can't do it no more. Thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure. You are a phenomenal young lady. Keep up the great work.
Yes, thank you.
For sure. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks for listening.